Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the United States of America, because during the previous 12 hours the President of the United States of America made a very important statement. What Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad. He is playing with fire. So this is very interesting statement. Basically, this is something like a threat to the President of the Russian Federation, that if the President of the Russian Federation doesn't stop, most likely Russia will face significant consequences. And of course, first of all, we are talking about the use of long-range cruise missiles of German production, French production, and the United Kingdom production. We are talking about Taurus missiles, Storm Shadow missiles, and most likely Scalp missiles. But the interesting thing is that, for example, the President of the United States of America didn't told us anything about Zelensky, how he didn't say that Zelensky and Ukraine during these days were attacking Russia as well with the use of the significant number of drones. For example, during the previous night, the Russians continue providing us additional reports about the situation in the air, and according to the Russians, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians used lots of drones. For example, during the period of time between the 9 p.m. and the 12 a.m. of, let's say, between the 27th and 28th of May, the Russians brought down 112 drones of the armored forces of Ukraine. And furthermore, according to information we have, according to the total report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, during the previous day, during the past night from 9 p.m. of Moscow time on May 27th to 7 a.m. on 28th of May, air defense alert system destroyed and intercepted 296 drones. So this is one of the biggest number of drones that Ukraine used since the beginning of the special military operation. And we see that the Western countries, the President of the United States of America doesn't say anything about this situation. We see that Ukrainians continue attacking in the direction of the city of Moscow with the purpose to break through Russian defense and to prepare roads for further use of cruise missiles of Western production. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous night, we start receiving lots of photos and videos. For example, in these photos, we can see the consequences of Ukrainian attacks. Several buildings were damaged and destroyed. Furthermore, according to information we have, 42 drones were brought down over Moscow region at night. So this is the biggest number of drones that was destroyed over the Moscow region. So which means that Ukrainians currently have tools and have possibilities just with drones to clear the sky and to clear the road for further escalation, for further attacks with cruise missile in the direction of Moscow. So as for now, it's very difficult to say whether the Ukrainians are going to use these cruise missiles to attack Moscow. But if you ask my opinion, we believe that Ukrainians are going to do this. Furthermore, during the previous days, Zelensky started talking a lot about, let's say, ballistic missiles of Ukrainian production. So maybe Zelensky is not going to use, let's say, the cruise missiles of Western production to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia and to attack Moscow. Maybe he doesn't want this escalation. Nobody needs this escalation. But obviously, if Ukrainians indeed have their own ballistic missiles, most likely they will use them with the purpose to show the Russians their own possibilities and capabilities. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously we are waiting that from hour to hour Ukrainians would launch their ballistic missiles. By the way, this was also stated by the President of Ukraine, Zelensky. He reported that Russia will answer for their missiles attack and drone attacks during the previous days. Let's wait and see. Now let's talk about another important topic, about massing of Russian troops along the border. Russia to launch large-scale offensive, confident of victory, Washington Post. The main expected direction is the complete liberation of the DPR, so Donetsk People Republic analyst notes. There will also be smaller scale attacks along the border of the Sumy and Kharkiv regions to create a buffer zone. Currently, 125,000 Russian troops are stationed on the border of the Sumy and Kharkiv region. The publication claims Russia's plan to tie down Ukrainian forces along the front line, including including in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions, but otherwise they will give priority to Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka. So this is very interesting because today we start receiving, not today, but almost every single day we start receiving more and more updates from the northern parts of Ukraine. Several sources reported that the presence of the Russian armed forces is recorded on the border of the Chernigov region. The speaker of the group of forces Siversk, Vladimir Mashnik. At the same time, he noted that the greatest concentration of shelling and manpower opposite the Sumy region is from the Kursk region. And we got very interesting geolocation probably from the most northern part of Chernigov area. So this is the place where three countries have common border. We are talking about Belarus, Russia and Ukraine. And for example, in this point on this border crossing checkpoint, Ukrainians were attacking with FPV drone possible Russian positions. I don't remember even a single video from this area since the beginning of the special military operation, but we see that the building was damaged during the previous stages. So we see that Ukrainians are trying to check and to test these positions and this territory for the presence of the Russian troopers. So the Ukrainians probably try to control the situation. As of now, I'm not sure they know exact number of Russians that are located stationed there, but most likely there are Russian troops. Now let's talk about the Sumy direction. And first, let's talk about the villages of Yunakivka. The pro-Ukrainian sources reported, and today the group of forces north stated that the Russians answered the settlement of Yunakivka from the north. The Russians reported that currently and by the beginning of the 28th of May of 2025, the Russians managed to secure first buildings and first streets in the northeastern part of Yunakivka. So as of the beginning of the 28th of May, we don't have the exact geolocation or lines or some polygons on the map, but we expect and we believe that something like this is already under complete Russian control. So if this information is correct, then most likely the Russians got some positions and foothold to concentrate and to mass themselves in this area. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv direction, and first let's talk about the city of Volchansk. We continue receiving different updates from this area. During the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Basically, the Russians launched their final offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory. For example, this picture that you can see in front of your screens is the situation by the end of the 26th of May of 2025, and this is approximately the date when the Russians launched their final offensive operation. By the end of the 27th of May, the Russians managed to secure several positions, additional blocks in the most important areas, and by the morning of the 28th of May, we got additional changes on the ground, and the most important, several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the northern part of the city of Volchansk. So once again, as we discussed in the previous video, this territory is already under complete Russian control. Now it's very interesting what the Russians are going to do next, either to cross the river of Volcha with the purpose to, let's say, move further deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, or the Russians will continue moving in the eastern direction, trying to improve their positions along the river of Volcha with the purpose to cut and to create this secure zone. Everything depends how exactly the Russians were tasked to take this pocket completely or just to create a secure zone. When talking about the northeastern part of Kharkiv, today we got additional reports about this pocket and about additional progress on the ground. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Russians crossed the Kharkiv border with Kharkiv region here, and today we got confirmation that the Russians managed to improve their positions, and the most important is that several pro-Russian resources reported that the village of Stroivka was completely captured by the Russians by the morning of the 28th of May. So as for now, we are waiting for additional geolocations and details, but if this information is correct, then most likely by the beginning of the 28th of May of 2025, the Russians already established complete control over everything to the east of this red line, and the Russians continue advancing further in the direction of Dvarechinska and Balogovka. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Chasiv Yar direction. Today we got several interesting geolocations. Let's discuss first this video. This video was published by the 13th Mechanized Brigade, and this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian stormtroopers that were moving on the Ukrainian side of the river and water reservoir. So Russian troopers were moving towards Ukrainian positions, they were ambushed, and the Ukrainians began bombing them. So this episode took place exactly in this area. The Russians crossed this reservoir, so we believe and we expect that that most likely these 3 lines were captured by the Russians. Most likely we will adjust the map before the next video will color this territory. So we see that the Russians are trying to mass themselves and consolidate troops on this side of reserve with the purpose to attack most likely the village of Vasyukovka from the back. This will allow the Russians to begin outflanking operation in the direction of the city of Siversk. Furthermore, according to several mappers, the Russians improved their positions to the west of the village of Grigorovka. This forest was taken by the Russians during the previous days, according to several mappers. So this is very important, because if this information is correct, then most likely Ukrainians lost positions on the Russian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in the vicinity of the city of Chasiv Yar. So now the Russians control this entire foothold. Now they are tasked to move further and to take the Ukrainian side of this canal as well. When talking about the Kliban-Byksky pocket and the situation along N32 roads during the previous 12 hours, we haven't received much. The most interesting updates are coming from, let's say, the N32 road. Today, pro-Russian resources made very interesting analysis regarding reinforcements and reserves that Ukrainians were forced to redeploy in this direction. The Ukrainian armored forces are trying to stop the offensive of the Russian armored forces on Konstantinovka direction. The 44th Mechanized Brigade was transferred to the direction from the Kupiansk direction, the 21st Anti-Tank Battalion from Pokrovsk, the 36th Marine Brigade from Kherson, the 36th Regiment of the National Guard from the rear, with the court was pulled up in the Toriets direction, and the 12th Azov Brigade was pulled up to the second line just in case. By saying just in case, they're saying that the 12th Azov Brigade main purpose is to be something like anti-retreat forces. This 82nd Airborne Assault Brigade was transferred, and the 43rd Artillery Brigade. So the Ukrainians managed to bring a lot of forces in this area with one purpose: to stabilize the situation. But as we discussed in the previous videos, the Russians also introduced fresh forces and are ready to move further. And the most important, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy units in this area, which means that some directions become very weak. We're talking about Sumy, Kherson, and probably Kharkiv regions, where the Russians most likely will intensify their offensive operation. According to information we have, according to several pro-Russian resources, the village of Poltavka was taken by the Russians during the previous night. So the Russians managed to reach these anti-tank ditches, and now they will start thinking how to move further. Currently, according to information we have, there are also attempts from the Russian side to get the village of Rusin Yar. As for this village, it's very difficult to understand whether the Russians managed to enter or those were just attempts of reconnaissance operation. Currently, the Russians are focused to secure and to destroy this pocket between the villages of Malinovka, Miralyubovka, and Yelizavetovka. Today we got to this video where we can see how Russian troops were moving in the direction of this pocket, trying to outflank and trying to tighten the noose around Ukrainian positions. The Russians were under very heavy artillery fire. So, according to many experts, now this is the main task and the main priority of the Russian forces, to take this pocket under complete control. Furthermore, several pro-Russian resources reported that there is already a cauldron with Ukrainian forces inside. So as for now, it's very difficult to say the exact number of Ukrainian units in this area, but the Russians are saying that there are hundreds of Ukrainians that were caught in cauldron without any possibility for evacuation. As for the South Donetsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just regular activities. The Russians continue advancing in the direction of Kamar and Fedorovka. We have videos, but without any changes on the ground. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.